Hey, good morning, scholars. We are now moving into week 9 after discussing briefly the Aeneid and Aeneas and his journey from Troy over to Latium last week. We are now moving on to the founding of Rome, finally. So let's just jump into it. That's in the way, isn't it? Okay, so Rome is called the Eternal City. It's actually a beautiful, beautiful place. If you have never been, I would recommend taking the chance to go if you ever get it. I understand not everybody's in a position to just up and travel, but hopefully one day you will get the chance to go to Rome. It's wonderful. I've been a few times and I loved it every time. So, but this lesson is all about Rome and how it got its start. Um, Okay, there we go. First, before we get to Rome, we're going to talk about a different city, actually. The city is called Alba Longa. There's a bit of a history here, but essentially, to give you the brief version, after Aeneas and his family settled in Latium, they settled down in a city called Lavinium. And after about 15 to 30 years, Aeneas' son, Ascanius, actually went and settled another city called Alba Longa. That's this. These are the remnants of what historians believe was Alba Longa, and it's interesting. You can see people have actually built right on top of it. Um, there's not a whole lot of distance between people nowadays and where people used to live. Anyway, uh, then about 400 years passed, and there was various kings of Alba Longa, all of, doing different things, and they each had stories. But what we're going to focus on today is the story of a king called Amulius. Amulius was the king of Alba Longa. He has a brother named Numitor, and their father decided that the two of them should split the duties of ruling the kingdom. So they would essentially both be kings. However, Amulius did not like that idea, so he trapped his brother Numitor, imprisoned him for his entire life, and took the sole rulership of the kingdom. This story focuses on a couple of people called Romulus and Remus. They were twin brothers. They were born during the reign of King Amulius in Alba Longa, but they were the sons of King Numitor's daughter, and that's going to be important for later. So they were, because King Amulius didn't want any threats to his rulership, he actually took the twin boys right after they were born, and he put them in a basket sort of thing and dumped them into the river Tiber. And they washed up on shore at a certain point, and they were found by a wolf. And this wolf heard them sort of crying in their basket and came and rescued them, pulled the basket out of the river, and actually picked up the boys and took them to its wolf cave and gave them food and everything. It's kind of a weird story, but that's what the Romans believed for the myth of their founding. These two boys were eventually found by a farmer, and we'll get to that in a minute. And again, this is roughly 400 years after Aeneas landed in Latium. So yeah, there's sort of a picture of this wolf saving these two little boys out from the river. It's a pretty interesting story, but they were found by a man named Faustulus, who was a farmer in the area. He came upon this cave where the wolf had these two little boys um, in the cave, and he went and got the boys and brought them home. He and his wife had been trying to have children for seemingly forever, and this was a clear sign from the gods that that these boys were meant to be their kids. So now the cave is called Lupercal, and that is an important place actually in Italy today. And will, but they sort of view that as the beginning of the Roman people is in that cave. Okay, so these two boys, they grew up. They ended up being raised by the farmer and his wife. They grew up, and as they grew up, they were tall, strong, handsome, good-looking, charismatic. They attracted lots of followers. They got lots of friends. They and even some soldiers in the nearby areas started to become loyal to them just by virtue of their being so magnetic with their personalities, right? So these two boys, they grew up, and by the time they were teenagers, they were strong and athletic, and they learned how to be soldiers, learned how to be warriors. And at the time, there was a lot of unrest in the area, and they would eventually learn the truth about who they were. The unrest was because there had been a push to get King Amulius out of the kingdom and to put Numitor back in as the king. And that was because Amulius was not a good king generally. He was just mean, very awful to people. Um, so as you can see here on the left, he was a cruel king who nobody really liked. He even killed his own children to make sure that they didn't threaten him being the king, right? And he was dealing with the civil war for the second time. Um, while attempting to suppress his brother. So there were lots of people in the country or in the city who wanted Numitor to be the king. And so there was sort of a rebellion right there. So Remus and Romulus got involved in this rebellion. Um, and they took the side of the rebels, and um, they gathered together a lot of their friends, their loyal soldiers, and everything, and they made an attack on the prison where Numitor was held in. And it turns out that this was actually a successful attack. They broke into the prison amidst all the fighting. They got Numitor out, and um, they got out of there okay, mostly. Um, Remus was actually captured during this fight, so Romulus had to escape with Numitor, but without his twin brother. Um, then, while Remus was sitting in prison, Romulus started to plan this jailbreak so that he could go in and get his brother out. And it was around this time that Numitor came to Romulus and said, "Hey, I know I've been in jail this whole time, but you look awfully familiar, and if I had to guess, I would say that you are my grandsons, which would make you guys the sort of the in line for the kingdom. Because remember, Amulius killed all of his children, so he didn't have any. And then Numitor's daughter, she couldn't inherit the kingdom because back then they didn't really recognize females as being able to rule a kingdom, right? So that would make the boys the next in line after Numitor. So, armed with this newfound knowledge and the truth about their identity, Romulus sort of like strengthened his resolve, gathered up his friends, and they attacked the palace again. They ended up not only freeing Remus, but they also were able to capture Amulius and kick him out of the kingdom, never to return again. They took Numitor and they proclaimed him as the new king, and everybody was happy. Romulus and Remus could have been next in line to be kings of Alba Longa, and they were heroes of this whole war, and everybody loved them, all this great stuff. But they felt in their hearts that they didn't really want to be the king of Alba Longa. And instead, they knew what they really wanted to do was to start their own city. So they eventually left Alba Longa, not in a bad way. I mean, there was no bad blood. They gathered up a bunch of their friends and their most loyal supporters, and they went and they founded their own city. And this city eventually became called Roma, or Rome. First, though, they took their families and their followers with them. They started a new city in the area where they were raised. So they went back there, and a dispute came up between the brothers that involved one of them wanting to build the city on one hill and another one wanting to build the city in another hill. Rome is known for having 7 hills around the city, so they couldn't decide which one they wanted to build the main part of their city on. And unfortunately, this dispute came to blows, and sorry, before we get to that, they decided that they would settle it by what's called an augury. And back then, well, an augury is sort of when you look for signs or omens that come from the gods to tell you what is the right thing to do. So what they did was they did some prayers and everything, and then they went to just observe. One went to the one hill, and one went to the other hill, that each respective hill that they wanted to settle on. And during this augury, they would look for birds, which they felt would be a sign from the gods, and so Remus saw 6 vultures, and he felt like that was a pretty good sign. Romulus, on the other hand, saw 12 vultures on his hill, so he had doubled the amount of vultures that Remus saw, and therefore felt that the augury went in his favor. So that meant that the gods intended for them to build the city there. Unfortunately, the followers of Remus didn't necessarily agree with this method of settling disputes. So Remus's followers started a fight against the followers of Romulus and himself. And unfortunately, during the course of this fight, Remus was killed, leaving Romulus as the sole sort of guy in charge during all of this. So he settled Rome on what is today called the Palatine Hill, which is where the palace is. And interestingly enough, the Palatine Hill is the hill where above the Lupercal, which is the cave where Faustulus found the boys. So they settled Rome. My light turned off. They settled Rome on top of Palatine Hill above the Lupercal, and that's where they started their city. And so from then on, the city of Rome just grew and grew and grew, and ended up becoming this major superpower through the entire world. It grew to the point where the empire was as large, essentially, as the United States in terms of like square mileage, right? And so through all of this, though, the Romans held this belief that their people had mythological origins, that they were tied in with the gods, and this all goes all the way back to that wedding with the apple, where Paris chose Venus, and then Aeneas ended up being Venus's son, and she saved him during that fight because she had a vested interest in the Trojans' survival. And then when he came across the ocean to Latium and ended up mingling with the people who were in Latium, and his descendants ended up starting Alba Longa, and then the descendants of those they started Rome, right? And so the Romans, historically speaking, felt like they could trace their lineage from Romulus, the founder of Rome, all the way up through the kings of Alba Longa, all the way up to Ascanius and Aeneas. Ascanius, remember, was Aeneas' son. So all the way up the line, and Aeneas being the son of Venus meant that the Romans were the descendants of the gods themselves. And so even though all of this stuff that we've talked about today and previously dips in mythology, there's very little proof to support any of this, except for the fact that the city of Rome was founded, sometime I want to say it was about 1500 BC, somewhere around there. But even then, they don't have exact dates. Nobody knows exactly how it happened or who was in charge or anything like that. But the Romans, it doesn't really matter what historians and scholars today can prove. What matters is that the Romans believed that they were the descendants of the gods, and therefore they had a right to rule the world, and that it was not only their right, but it was their responsibility to do so um, with tact, with care, and uh, to rule the world as well as they could. Anyway, that's all for the lesson this week. Thank you all. I'm sorry, for this couple of days. I hope you have a wonderful couple of days, and I will see you back on Wednesday. Thanks.